Hey guys, welcome back to Clueless Gamers. I'm Pete.
And I'm Brian.
And welcome back to another edition, our final one of the 2020 season. Brian, I was saying right before we started, it's a little bit sad. But first and 10 here on Clueless Gamers, our NFL football podcast. The last time we got together, which we don't get together, as you said, as often as we would like to, just because, we live lives and have jobs. And unfortunately, this isn't our job as much as we want it to be. But the last time we talked, we recapped the divisional round and the conference championship round. We didn't even get to say our predictions of the Super Bowl just because we were supposed to get together for kind of a Super Bowl preview show. And then here in the Northeast, where Brian and I live, here in Jersey, we got hit with a massive 3-day snowstorm. So I worked a ton, and I was doing like 12-hour shifts, and I was barely home. So I'll take that as my fault here. But that episode didn't get posted to the channel, if you guys noticed. I'm going to link it right here, right now, as I'm saying it. It is in the playlist. It went up unlisted, but it is live. So if you want to take a nostalgia lane to know kind of our thoughts, even though they're like 3 weeks old, and see all our picks there, definitely check that out. I put the timestamps in there as well, so you can skip around. Also in there is our yearly picks of how well we did. So please check that out, because that was a ton of fun. But Brian, getting to this episode, which is all pretty much about the Super Bowl and a little bit of offseason news, but let's kick off with the Super Bowl. I think it's fair to say, the Bucs win, 31-9 or whatever it was. Probably one of the worst Super Bowls I've ever watched. Definitely not as bad as Broncos Seahawks. I still think that's the worst Super Bowl of all time that I've watched up to the point in my life. But this might be second. It was very boring. There was not really a game, and the main reason why I would say that wasn't a game is because, as we said in that episode that I'll link, hey, the Chiefs are hurt on the offensive line. They had to shift around about 3 different people there. They brought in a guard that had not played all season. They moved their right tackle to left tackle. Eric Fisher left the conference championship game right at the end there with an Achilles injury. They had Mitchell Schwartz. He was out at right tackle. They were a mess. And this Bucs pass rush, which had really come alive in the last 6 to 8 weeks, ate Mahomes alive. And he ran for something like 497 yards of just him running around in the backfield. It was like the most ever, which somehow I don't know how they have that stat. But kind of what was, Brian, your overall take on the Super Bowl, and what were you thinking when you were watching it?
Well, they have a stat for everything these days, don't they? So when I saw that, I thought the same thing. Was like, how can they even keep track of such things?
Exactly.
But yeah, I think you nailed it. I think that was the story of the games. When you watch the Chiefs in this game, their offense just was not in it. And, throughout the season, I thought their offense overall was a tick down from where it had been the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Obviously, they were still very potent. They still made a great run, but I just didn't think they were quite as dynamic as they had been. And we had kind of asked the question, are they just bored this season, or are they just not
Yeah.
as good? And I think we got the answer because they were manhandled, and
Yeah.
clearly the injuries on the offensive line I think were underplayed going in. I don't think people put enough stock into that. And when you watched it, Mahomes was just running for his life, and when he did get a throwaway, it was contested, and he was flustered. I mean, he still made some unbelievable plays, but he didn't have any help around him. And look, it was a game that was pretty much dominated. The Bucs got out to a comfortable lead, and you never got the sense the Chiefs could settle into their offense and make a game of it. And it turned into, as you said, a dud, a blowout, which in the Super Bowl is never what you want to see.
It's never what you want to see. I mean, a lot of time, especially for primetime games, unless you're a fan of that team, you never want to see a blowout happening. And so I'm sure Bucs fans were probably the only people in the entire country or world that were happy about what was going on. But yeah, when you get to the Super Bowl, you want to see something competitive, and it's not like the Bucs did anything insane offensively.
Yeah.
They kind of took what was given to them. They took the short fields. They didn't turn over the ball. They were very methodical in how they moved. And you know what? They went into the game and they said, hey, you want to take away Mike Evans, really? He had 1 catch for 31 yards. Cool. All right, fine. You want to take away Chris Godwin? Cool. AB? No problem. I'll throw to Gronk right down the middle. Remember that
Yep.
guy? Remember Rob Gronkowski, the guy that I've won like 3 Super Bowls with? Yeah, I'll just throw it to him. And it was kind of Brady just picking them apart over the middle of the field. He found AB for another touchdown, Gronk for 2 tutties, as Brady said after the game, and their kind of weird bro kind of language that they have going on. And it was just it was just manhandled. That defense just deserves all the credit. I know Brady ended up winning the MVP, and that's because usually they give it to the quarterback. And he had a solid game, but he didn't do anything insane. It
Right.
was just that on that defense, there wasn't one player that you could point to and go, that guy's the MVP. It was just so many guys did their job, from Winfield to Sue to JPP to Shaq Barrett to Devin White. It was
Yep.
everybody did a fantastic job, and they went, all right, we'll just give it to Brady because he's the leader. He's the guy that brought them together and gave them kind of that championship edge, that championship mentality that turned. Remember, Brian, this team 7-9 just last season, and now they're Super
Hmm.
Bowl champs. It's the first time since 2002, only the second one in their franchise's history. Yeah, and it's the only way you're happy is if you're a Bucs fan, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, that's the difference too, is the 7-9 season was led by Jameis Winston at quarterback, and we know that he's a talented player. He had a bunch of touchdown passes up among the league leaders, but also what you got was interceptions and at times careless play. And with Brady, obviously you get just an enormous step up in class, and it proved to be a huge difference maker like was projected. I mean, that's what happens when you bring in Tom Brady. Even though there were some ups and downs through the regular season, they got it done when it mattered the most. And getting back to Gronkowski, I found it interesting because all regular season, kind of one of the ongoing themes
Yeah,
was Brady's inability to connect with Gronk, and
yeah.
he was almost like a missing factor in
He
this
was an
offense. And you
afterthought.
Right, he was an afterthought. You wondered, why did he come out of retirement to not catch any passes and not be a big part of that offense? And then in big time crunch time, the Super Bowl, when it matters most, of course, he steps up and makes big time
Always
plays. I
does.
mean, 2 touchdowns. Yeah, the guy is just amazing. Overshadowed Travis Kelce, who still had a pretty good game, but
Yeah.
accumulated a lot of yardage and garbage time. He was not really a big factor in the crux of the game. So credit to Gronk, who, as we know, is a future Hall of Famer, and Brady found him when it mattered the most.
Yeah, you remember back in 2018 when they beat my Rams in the Super Bowl, and the AFC Championship game, he made that big catch at the end of the game there. And then you go into the Super Bowl, he's not really doing much. Both offenses are struggling. It's 3-3 going into like the late third, early fourth quarter, and he catches that big pass that puts the game away, and he kind of
Yep.
breaks it loose and gets inside the 10-yard line. So he's been able to make the plays when they needed it. And I think Brady and him understand, and the coaching staffs, wherever he is, whether it's New England or Tampa, they understand, hey, with all his injuries and how old he is, like, he's not the same player. He's never going to be the same player that he was, right? But he's still a guy that's going to make that catch in that moment, that in a big game, I could keep feeding him and I know I can count on him. And he proved it once again. I would have said it on the pre-show. Wasn't that shocking that he was kind of Brady's guy, the one he trusted the most? Because think about it. Who else has been in the Super Bowl on that whole team, right? Who else has done this, what Brady and Gronk have done all of
Yep.
these years? And it just makes sense that he leaned on him, especially with the corners on the outside for Kansas City and the safeties trying to lock down these Pro Bowl receivers. He's the guy over the middle. He's wide open. And I just thought it was fascinating that it was so Gronk centric and not even like a Cameron Brate. It was just they trusted that it was going to be Gronk and he was going to make those plays. I want to shift over to the beginning of the game, really the first half. What were your thoughts on the penalties and how the game was going to be called, and kind of how the Chiefs really dug themselves in a hole they ultimately could not climb out of by shooting themselves in the foot for, what was it, like 12 penalties in the first half? It was something
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah, and when the officials get in the way like that, and I think that's the best way to describe it, especially in a big game like the Super Bowl, it just is aggravating because nobody wants to see a penalty fest. And while a couple of them probably you could make the case they were penalties, there were some that were kind of head scratching calls, I
Right.
think.
Or a
And
little bit like, just let him play. It's the Super
yeah,
Bowl.
Exactly. It's the Super Bowl, and especially after what we saw in the title games where they did definitely let them play, especially the NFC game with Tampa and Green Bay, but that was not the case with the Super Bowl. Right off the bat, we were getting penalty. And the thing was, it wasn't just penalties, it was penalties on big passing plays that
Huge
turned into,
plays, like the
yeah,
one to
like
Evans.
40-yard plays.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I mean, that was a big factor that early on in the game, the Chiefs were making those kind of mistakes. And I just think it didn't allow them to get into any kind of a rhythm offensively.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it was 11 penalties for the game for the Chiefs. I believe it was 9 penalties in the first half. But yeah, was some of that self-inflicted and they deserved it? 100%. But there was a couple plays. The one I was not a huge fan of was on the interception because that's a game-changing play. You know, the ball gets tipped up. You know, Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu is always around the ball somehow. He picks it off, and then they called it on one of the corners, number 35, I believe it was. I forget his name. And I really thought it was very ticky-tacky. I really didn't think he grabbed him that much, so there wasn't any holding. And then look what happens. You know, they get the ball back, it's first down, and then the Bucs drive in for a touchdown. And right there, you knew, like, I don't think the Chiefs, for all their amazing playoff comebacks, I think the way that offensive line is playing, the way the Bucs pass rush is, and the way that Brady's being methodical and keeping them on schedule, I don't think the Chiefs are going to be able to pull this one out. And they ultimately didn't. You know, they go down 21-6 going into the half. And that was really all she wrote. I mean, we didn't even need to play a second half, and I'm sure there was a bet out there on FanDuel or something. I wonder what the money line is and how much money you could have won to say that the Chiefs would not score a touchdown in the Super Bowl. This offense doesn't even score a
Yeah.
garbage time touchdown. I mean, that's just. I'm still a week later that we're filming this. I'm still flabbergasted that that even happened.
With that offense and the weapons that they have, it's a good point. I mean, but you credit the Bucs defense. They played their best game of the season, I think it's fair to say, in the game that mattered the most and delivered a great performance.
Yeah, and also as you pointed out, the Chiefs didn't help themselves out with some of these key pass catchers, right? You know, Tyreek Hill really couldn't find himself. He had like
Yeah.
no catches in the first quarter. He was really struggling late into the game. He had like 2 catches for 13 yards. And then Travis Kelce, he dropped that one key third down in KC territory. I mean, hit him right in the hands. He never
Hmm.
drops a pass like that. Then there was another one where Mahomes was scrambling out, and I'm sure you remember this. He made that amazing play where he like threw
Yep.
it where he's completely parallel to the ground.
Hmm.
And he hits Darrell Williams right in the face mask when that would have either at least been on the 1 yard line, if not a touchdown. I mean, it hits him right in the face. I know it was a little bit deflected, but it hit him right in the face. So his guys weren't helping him out and making the plays that we're accustomed to this Chiefs offense making, and that ultimately ended up hurting them. On top of Mahomes being the most pressured in his career and the most a QB, they said analytically at least for how many stats they have, that any QB's ever been in any Super Bowl that they have recorded, which is just crazy.
Yeah, and just overall, the offense looked flat, and the point was raised, and I think it's a good one. It's also hard to know just how much this played into it, but the whole story with Andy Reid's son on the
Right.
coaching staff with the car accident, it had to figure from an emotional standpoint that played some sort of role because they looked flat. They didn't look like themselves when you watch them in this game, and I have to believe it's hard to say just how much of a factor that was. They brought it up on the broadcast. It didn't come till late. I thought they would bring it up earlier,
Yeah.
but that I think had to play into the equation in some way.
It could have. I still think the offensive line and how many shifts they had is the main crux of why they struggled, and that just Bucks pass rush is great. But yes, obviously our thoughts and prayers go out to that tragedy happening, and I believe the little girl is still in critical condition in an unfortunate situation, a situation that never really should have happened, and that someone that's a professional, someone that's an adult, needs to take better care and have better thoughts of themselves and of others, and not put themselves in a situation like that where it's reportedly that alcohol may have been involved and stuff like that. So you have to imagine that it at least weighed on Coach Reid at that moment.
Hmm.
But I'm not going to say that that was an overwhelming factor. I think at the end of the day, guys got to play on the field and injuries mount up, and you know they weren't in sync, and that could have attributed to maybe being flat a little bit early in the game, but also committing as many penalties they had and being as grabby as they were in the secondary.
Yeah.
that's going to ultimately kill you. And you know what? The Bucs, they did great even rushing the ball. I think we should say that.
Mm-hmm.
Leonard Fournette, I think, had like 16 carries for like 81 yards. Rojo added another like 12 for 60 or 61, something like that. So they played keep away. They played their game. Brady was great with the audibles. You know, he only had, 201 passing yards, 21
Mm-hmm.
and 29. I mean, it's not like we're talking not world-blowing numbers, but you know what? We know how Brady is, and Brady only cares about one thing, winning. Right? He threw
Yep.
for over 500 yards in the Super Bowl in the loss to the Eagles and Nick Foles. Do you think he'd rather be doing that or rather be passing for just 200 yards and winning? By the biggest margin he's ever won in his Super Bowl career, I'm sure he'll take his 7th ring going away in that fashion.
And that right there tells you why stats can be misleading,
Absolutely.
because at the end of this game, when you looked at the quarterback numbers, Mahomes had far more passing yards than Brady
Yeah.
did, and on the scoreboard it was totally lopsided. So a lot of times, when a quarterback is down, they're throwing late, they accumulate yardage when it doesn't matter, and so that's why passing stats don't always tell the story. So I think that's a good point there as well.
Yeah, I mean, the time of possession as well was what 31 minutes 23 seconds of Tampa, 28-37 for KC, so fairly close, nothing crazy there. The interceptions by KC, those two, that was the killer, and then the other one is 11 penalties to 4 penalties from KC to Tampa. I mean, that tells you your story right there. Penalties and turnovers, and it's going to ultimately end up killing you. And it's just unfortunate that we just didn't get a great Super Bowl,
Yeah.
considering that these two teams and how prolific they were. And you always want a great Super Bowl. I thought the commercials were not great as well, which is kind of an overall just kind of downer Super Bowl, which maybe is the perfect way to end the 2020 season, right? Everything we have with the pandemic and all these players being out and how hard it's been, and this player or this team is not playing on this day. It only makes sense, Brian, doesn't it, that we get just a lame duck Super Bowl to end it off.
It does. And, it's funny. I was thinking that had we done a preview show, which obviously we were planning on doing, you and I would have been waxing poetic about the Chiefs' offense. Now they were going to score all these points.
Right?
And then it turned out the game was a completely, I mean, like everybody, his favorite thing is to come up with a score prediction for the Super Bowl. I would bet there was not a single prediction that said 31-9 Tampa. If
No.
there was somebody who predicted that, I mean, cash in your chips.
Exactly. They'd be amazing. I saw people pick Tampa, but not by that margin. Not at all.
No,
To
no.
pick KC with no touchdowns? I mean, are we kidding?
Yeah.
Yeah, for the record, just to finish up the season, you took KC 31-24. I took KC 30-27. Obviously, we were not only both wrong KC wise, we were both wrong score wise. I mean, we were somewhere in the neighborhood of the Bucs scoring points, but nowhere near KC, just because who could
No.
have honestly seen that coming? And just like I said, the perfect way to kind of end the season. But Brian, you have any other thoughts on the Super Bowl, or we want to jump to some off-season news?
Well, just one last thing is
Sure.
I just to mention how remarkable it is with Brady, right?
Yeah.
I mean, leaving the Patriots, basically picking his landing spot, knowing that he had a talented team to work with, a talented group of pass catchers specifically, and to turn that team, which is, a year in, year out, a non-competitive team, a team that doesn't make the playoffs very often. Last time was '07, and he picks his spot and boom, wins a Super Bowl. It
Yeah.
just shows his greatness. If there's anyone out there who denies he's the greatest of all time, they're just not paying attention, because it's about as obvious as anything in sports at this point.
Yeah, you look at the Buccaneers with the worst winning percentage of any professional team in the United States. He picks that team, which definitely had talent, homegrown and otherwise, and also the ability for Brady to attract his guys, a Gronk, an AB, a Leonard Fournette, who really, honestly, were the 3 players that did the most impact for the Bucs, which was crazy, and they're all Brady's guys that he convinced to come in. You can't say enough about the GOAT. He's obviously the GOAT. At this point, and probably forever, you could say that he's going to win this divorce over Belichick. I mean, to see what the Patriots did, to say what he did, it's night and day. It'll be interesting to see kind of how the rest of their careers go, in particular Bill Belichick, because I believe he'll have more years. But who knows? I mean, maybe Brady will
Yeah.
play to 55 at this point, barring injury. I mean, who knows? But absolutely astounding. I can say pretty confidently we'll never see anything like this again, to have a 43-year-old quarterback go to another team where he's had all the success, historic success at one franchise, goes somewhere in the first year with a pandemic, wins the
Hmm.
Super Bowl. I mean, you can't say enough about the culture that Brady brings in, and whatever you think about him, because I have my own thoughts personally of what I think about him off the field, or kind of how he can be a sore loser after games. With all that being said, you can't deny the guy's a winner, and he's one of the greatest players that's ever going to play this game.
No doubt. And just to quickly touch on Fournette, who, as we mentioned, one of the guys who had a big impact, and he's a player who was basically let for dead, right? A
Yeah,
high draft pick,
absolutely.
huge expectations coming out of LSU, but it was a disappointing run in Jacksonville. He gets released there. Wasn't really that much of a factor during the regular season, but good for him to have a big moment, had the 27-yard touchdown run in the Super Bowl, and now he's a champion too. So another good move made by Brady and the front office, of
Yeah,
course.
absolutely incredible. The AB too. I mean, Left for Dead, right? Nobody wanted to touch it. That was kryptonite. Like, you get radiation poisoning touching that guy, and he came in. He said, "Hey, I got this guy." Remember, it wasn't too long ago in the middle of the season, people were asking Bruce Arians about bringing in Antonio Brown, and he was like, "No way, he's not a fit for this locker room." 2 weeks later, the
Mhm.
guy's there. I mean,
Yep.
so that all has to do with Brady to get Gronk out of retirement, to get these guys going. It was nice moments for guys like even JPP or a Shaq Barrett to get a ring, to see Antonio Winfield Jr., to see him celebrate with his dad, who played 14 season, was a damn good player, and he never got a ring. That he could celebrate that with his son on the field. So it was nice to see those kind of moments. All the suffering that Mike Evans has had over the years, and how much success he's had, but he never got close to winning. He gets one, so I think it was well deserved for a lot of those guys. And hey, they're definitely going to be one of the favorites. I still, early season predictions, I still put KC as the favorites right now to go back to the Super Bowl at the least, if not win it. But Tampa Bay, you could argue that they are the top contender in the NFC. We'll see what happens in free agency, because they have the most free agents of anyone in the league. So I guess we'll see what happens. But an historic season for those guys there, and they should be damn proud of what they did.
Yeah, so I think you wanted to move on now to some of the things
Yeah,
happening off the field. One thing, especially concerning your favorite team, which broke oddly late on a Saturday night. I was working, and all of a sudden you
yeah.
see it come across with Adam Schefter, and boy, that was a bombshell.
Yeah, what Brian is referencing, if you've been living under a rock, is the Los Angeles Rams about a couple weeks ago traded Jared Goff, this year's 2021 third round pick, and the 2022 and 23, because we don't have a first round pick this year, to the Detroit Lions. So 3 picks in Goff, all went to the Detroit Lions just for us to get back Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford made it clear that, hey, he didn't really want to be part of Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes' rebuild in Detroit, which is understandable. He played like 12 seasons there, and he hasn't exactly been treated the best in Detroit with the best personnel. And so they mutually agreed to part ways. A report, Brian, I'm sure that you saw came out that was pretty interesting after the trade was done, that Stafford basically said he wanted to go to a winner, but he wanted to go pretty much anywhere but New England. That was the
Yeah,
only place that he made clear, please do not trade me there. Uh,
interesting. Yeah.
Very interesting. Does that have to do with how devoid they are of talent? Probably. Does it have to also do with he has once no part of Matt Patricia, who now has been welcomed back by New England? I think that might be part of it as well.
Maybe
Clearly,
he doesn't want part of Bill Belichick too.
right. Yeah, clearly, I think also Matt Patricia burned some bridges when he was in Detroit for those
Yeah.
2.5 seasons. But yeah, that trade, just an absolute blockbuster. I mean, I want to get your thoughts honestly first. Like, what were you honestly thinking, and how well? Who's the winner, if I can say, of this trade? How well do you think this will work out for both sides?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Obviously, you don't get these big, huge trades in
Yeah,
the NFL
two
very
two
often,
first
especially
overall
involving,
picks.
right, big time quarterbacks. I think the consensus was the Rams gave up a very hefty package with all the draft
Yeah.
picks and the fact that Goff was included in the deal. Whether you consider that a throw-in or not, it seems like the Lions actually had plans for Goff as their quarterback. But
Yeah.
I am a little higher on the trade from the Rams' perspective, I think, than most people, just because I've long been a fan of Stafford, and I don't think he's gotten his proper due. We've talked about it here that there's been a lot of issues in Detroit, personnel around him. He hasn't done a lot of winning. Some of it has been self-inflicted. He's not
Sure.
always the greatest decision maker. But this is a guy who, to me, is still an upper echelon quarterback. And I think in that Rams offense with Sean McVay calling the plays, I think it's a massive upgrade from what they've had in Goff, who,
Wow.
yes,
Okay.
had his moments, but I just think Stafford potentially can take them to a new level that with that defense, they have a championship caliber defense. That now, if they get enough of an upgraded quarterback, which I think Stafford can be, you're looking at this team as a legitimate Super Bowl contender. So I think they just looked at it and said, really, what we need to do is get better at the quarterback position. And they saw the opportunity to get a guy like Stafford. And I think he still has big years in him. He's not over the hill. I mean, he's in his 30s, but I still think there are good years there. And I really think it's going to work out very well for the Rams.
Yeah, I believe he's 33 this month or next month. He's had a litany of injuries, but to his credit, he only missed like 8 games or something like that and broke his streak of consecutive starts a couple of years ago because of the back injury. I believe it was last year. He's played through pretty much all of it. You could attribute that to a lot of his offensive lines, just being not good. His running game being probably the worst in the league, if not bottom 2 in the league over his entire stint in Detroit. And besides, yes, Megatron just got elected to the Hall of Fame, right? Unbelievable talent Calvin Johnson is. He's had some other pieces. Marvin Jones is nice. I hear there's rumblings that he might want to join Stafford in L.A., but it's not like he's had some world beaters there besides Calvin Johnson. And I think that he has definitely, undeniable talent. I would say he's an
Mm-hmm.
upgrade over Goff, but I'm a little bit more, as you would predict, a little cynical on it. I'm a little more lukewarm. I was very negative on it when the trade happened. I've since kind of evened out a little bit, and I'm
Yep.
more like half and half the more I thought about it. The main
Uh-huh.
point of this is, from the Rams' perspective, is 2 things. One, they believe that they're going to be able to re-sign some of their guys because they have some key free agents, and that this team is ready to make a Super Bowl run. They have all the pieces. It's just the quarterback they needed. So that's one. And Sean McVay is definitely the biggest proponent of believing that. The
Yep.
second one is they paid as much as they did to Detroit to dump that contract of Jared Goff. The
Mm-hmm.
Detroit is, this year the Rams are going to inherit in the 2021 season about a $22.2 million dead cap hit, which is huge, right? If you think about between that and a little bit of Brandon Cooks and Todd Gurley, they're going to be paying over $30 million in dead cap going into this season in 2021 to guys that are not even on the team, some of them for the last 2 seasons, which is not great, right? It's not a position you want to be in, but I think what it allows is now when that contract, that 4-year extension was about to kick in with Jared Goff, all of that is now on Detroit after this year. And so you get out from under that, where if you re-sign free agents or want to re-sign, some of your guys, or bring in new guys or draft new guys, whatever it is, you could kind of backload their contracts and have it, because you have money later that you won't have for this year, where if Goff was still on the books, you're not going to have that even going into the next 3-4 years. And I think that was Les Snead, the GM, if I had to guess. I'm assuming that was his thinking around this, of why they paid so many picks. And also, it was reported that other people, like the San Francisco 49ers in the division, were in the running to make a trade for Matthew Stafford. And I believe that 2 first-round picks is what really sold Detroit in going for this. Not to mention, 2 of the guys that are newly in the front office in Detroit running things are 2 former Rams front office people that just left a couple months ago. And so you had a lot of, continuity there and a lot of familiarity with those guys, a lot of relationships. And I believe that's just what got the deal done ultimately.
And I think too is that this was the player that Sean McVay really wanted. That I heard after this trade, he was absolutely ecstatic about getting Stafford and really thinking that he can flourish in his offense. So I think you have to like that from a guy who knows offense as well as McVay does, that this was basically his handpicked guy.
Yeah, absolutely. He said for after the season ended, for those like last week and a half, couple weeks, he'd been watching film on Stafford, loved it. I also think that many people forget, because of the success that the Rams have had in the last 4 years, and what Goff has been able to do, where he's played well but not fantastic, and definitely the last 2 years he's been declining. But I think people forget that McVay wasn't here when the Rams selected, when Les Snead and Jeff Fisher, they took Goff 1 overall and gave up all those picks. This has never been McVay's guy. He stepped in, he embraced Jared Goff, and I think he believes, who knows, we'll see if it ends up being true, but McVay believes that he got the most out of Goff that he can possibly get out of him, and it was time for an upgrade. And I don't agree with the way that Les Snead and Sean McVay publicly roasted Jared Goff. I thought that was a little
Right.
unprofessional, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And as a Rams fan, I would have definitely not gone that way. But I think the sentiment and what they wanted to do and what they thought of Goff was clear, obviously, and they wanted an upgrade. And you know what? You look at the film of Stafford, I think McVay is not going to be limited of what he can do in a playbook. Yes, is he the most, he's not the most mobile guy. He's very similar to Goff in that way, but his arm, I think, is better. I think his accuracy is better. I think his anticipation and his timing is better, on top of the experience he has. And you hope this pays off, because ultimately, Brian, if this doesn't pay off and this goes sideways, Les Snead, if not Sean McVay, maybe in a couple of years are on the hot seat for a move like this.
That, and it's the kind of move that could end up setting the franchise back for years, especially because you're not able to build the team with first round picks, which that is the number one way to build a team, and
Usually, yeah.
not having them for an extended period of time wears on a team, a franchise over the years. So yeah, this absolutely has to be a hit for the Rams,
Yeah,
no question.
it has to be a hit. You definitely have to be getting to the playoffs, and you need to be competing for division titles, if not conference championships and Super Bowls. I just think that they believe they can do that with Stafford. This will be the longest that a team, I believe, in the draft era has not had a first-round pick. They will go 7 seasons at the moment, from 2016, when they picked Goff in the first round, till now in 2023, so 2017 to 2023, with no first round picks. And I think their thinking is, hey, we're going to be in the playoffs every year, so we're going to pick somewhere in the 20s. So how valuable really is that first round pick? It's basically like a second round pick when you get to that point. And they think, hey, we might be picking 32nd, so really have our first round pick. Who the hell cares?
Yeah.
I like when this team, Les Snead is not afraid to swing for the fences. I just don't like that sometimes he pays guys early when he does not need to, and that has come to bite them in the past, the present, and the future.
And you would say that would be the case for Goff, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because if
I
they
mean,
don't sign, remember they signed him, Brian, 2 years early. If they didn't sign them and they kind of kept it to the Dak treatment, his fifth-year option would be coming up now, and you just let him walk. You would say, no,
yeah,
you let him walk, and none of this would have happened. None of it.
right.
So, it happens. It's a fine line. It's very similar to what Philadelphia is going through with the Wentz situation, and how they're going to get out, from under there. I think that might be a little bit easier, considering he got benched and he didn't actually lead his team to the Super Bowl, but we'll see what happens. But overall, I'm a little more lukewarm on the trade. And I hope it works out. But I'm excited. I'm excited to hopefully get some training camp and some preseason to see what this looks like going into the 2021 season.
It's definitely going to be interesting to watch. That's for sure. Anytime you get big time quarterbacks changing teams, it's fun to see how it's going to play out.
Yeah, and as a final point, we should note that this trade, yes, is agreed upon, but it is not actually official until March 17th, that Wednesday when the new league year opens. So technically, something unforeseen could happen, and something horrible, God forbid, happens physically to one of these players, and the trade is nullified. But for the moment, this is a blockbuster trade. We're going to see a lot of those, Brian, because I think we're potentially, as we shift gears here, going to be in for maybe the most QB movement in the offseason that we've ever seen. And I want to start off just jumping as a quick update to Houston. Since we
Hmm.
last spoke, the final and seventh head coaching spot has been filled. It has been filled by assistant coach David Culley from the Baltimore Ravens. He's kind of been around in college and the NFL. I believe he's like 61. He's never had a chance at a coordinator spot, really, or a head coaching spot of any notoriety. And now he was handpicked and brought in by the Texans all these weeks later after all these other head coaches were hired. Kind of a guy that flew under the radar and
Yeah.
randomly came out of nowhere. What was your reaction to David Culley being hired by the Houston Texans as their next head football coach?
Well, I have to be honest, I didn't necessarily know too much about him,
Probably
but
many don't.
when you're picking coaching candidates, there's certain organizations that have a better handling of things, and picking a guy from the Ravens, I think, is a good spot because that's just a team that's been one of the more well-run organizations, I think, in the league. Obviously, he was a highly regarded assistant. I think it's interesting the age factor because we seem to be
Right.
going more in a trend of hiring younger coaches and more offensive minded. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And of course, the Texans have all sorts of things, which I think we're going to segue into with the roster. And of course, first and foremost is what happens with quarterback Deshaun Watson.
Right.
And then obviously the J.J. Watt news breaking that he was granted his release and free to sign with any team. So a lot of questions to answer in Houston, and will not at all be an easy job for a first-time head coach.
No, honestly, I feel bad for him. A guy that looks like, I've heard of David Culley before, just because John Harbaugh, he's one of those coaches I really listen to, I really respect, and he's talked even after this hiring so glowingly about what David Culley is and what he represents. The only African American hired in this head coaching cycle, which is also nice to see as well.
Mm,
But it's also a case of a guy that paid all his dues like him, and this is the job you get stuck with. And obviously he agreed to it, but you have to wonder, did Cal McNair and Nick Caserio and that new staff there in Houston, did they convince him and say, hey, you're going to have Deshaun Watson, and that convinced him to take this job? Because it doesn't look like Deshaun Watson's going to be there, but ultimately the Texans have all the power because there's a no trade clause there. He's under contract. He can't leave unless they actually get rid of him. I wonder if that was kind of part of the deal there. Otherwise, he could be in for some lame duck years, which is really going to be unfortunate because that team was routed by Bill O'Brien, and the job that new owner and taking over for his father, Cal McNair, I've never seen anything like this, honestly. I know I haven't been alive, tons and tons of years, but it's more in the sense of like, I've never seen a team spiral this quickly in a matter of really a year from the DeAndre Hopkins trade to this, of how poorly run this can be and how much someone can isolate their star players. And I guess we'll segue that into Deshaun Watson and kind of he is, the Texans have stayed firm on we are not trading him, and he has kind
yeah.
of stayed firm that he wants to be traded. He's made it clear. He's made it public since the last time we have talked. He's been posting some not so let's say subtle tweets where he's clearly subtweeting people on Twitter, and he's making his frustrations known. And what have you thought about Deshaun Watson kind of in the last couple weeks since we've last talked? And ultimately, Brian, as we approach the actual official offseason, will he find his way out of Houston?
I think ultimately he will, because I think as the years go on, what we're finding in all of sports is that the players increasingly are having more and more power, and especially in the higher positions like quarterback. When you have an unhappy quarterback, I think that's the only way it ends. I just don't think he's going to be able to stay on that roster with all the turmoil that the organization
Right.
is in, all the questions they have to answer. I just think he's going to realize he's much better off somewhere else. Now, where? Well, that's another question. Miami, who knows what they think of the young quarterback Tua, who obviously had his ups and downs. But I do think he will find his way on another team. And it just seems to be a little bit out of character for a guy who came with a
Absolutely.
reputation being
Yeah.
such a team first guy that some of the things now we're kind of hearing and the messages that he's sending that you reference with social media is not painting the same picture of the guy we sort of have been accustomed to seeing in his days in Houston to this point.
Absolutely, and that makes me side with Deshaun Watson. Of clearly, there's many things going on in Houston that we don't know behind the scenes. Obviously, it's got to be even worse than we think it is. And this stems, as we have covered, and we won't elaborate too much again. From he was supposed to be part of the GM and the head coaching search, he was not. He was basically lied to. They ignored the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars they paid to a research firm for a GM. They ignored all those candidates, which should be said were also minority candidates, and kind of went and plucked another New England guy, Nick Caserio, who I'm sure is qualified, but is kind of a random name that hasn't been trending up the tree of potential GM hires. And then it goes to this week. You had several people and personnel inside of Houston, longtime employees that are being let go or quitting, which I thought was fairly. There was a couple front office people that left. One of the PR women that has been there forever that everybody loved, and I apologize, I'm forgetting her name. She was subsequently let go. One of the head trainers that Deshaun was reportedly extremely close with, he was fired, and he's been there since the Texans have been a franchise for the last 17 years or whatever it is. You're not really endearing yourself if you're the Houston Texans front office and ownership to Deshaun Watson continually doing these things. How are you expecting to really keep him as your star quarterback? I'm baffled by these decisions.
Yeah, and then I think we should just touch on in closing with the Texans is J.J. Watt
Yeah,
being released, and I think this was something that didn't come as a surprise
no,
when you listen to his comments as the season went on last year. It just seemed like he was tired of everything that was going on and was ready to move on, ready for a change. It's unfortunate for Watt that as great of a player he was, and we've talked about this, that his last few years are just so marred by injuries that he
yeah,
just wasn't able to have the kind of impact that he's accustomed to. But I think every football fan out there wants to see him end up on a contender with a chance to win a Super Bowl because he's just a gamer, a guy who has just a tremendous motor. His credentials speak for themselves, the multiple time defensive player of the year and an end of an era for a franchise icon with that team.
yeah. Arguably, him and Andre Johnson are probably the two most recognizable figures in the short history of the Houston Texans. And yeah, I'm happy for him going for what he's done for that franchise, what he's done off the field. It's important to say for the city of Houston with the hurricane and everything that he's done. He'll always be a legend there. He's already a Hall of Famer if he retired today. Now, if he goes somewhere and gets his body right, maybe changes his regimen a little bit, he's only 31. I know he's a little bit older because of injuries, but I believe very much like a kind of like a Sue or someone else who can be a rotational defensive lineman, especially into the playoffs and down the stretch. He can give you a lot. And I think if he goes to a contender, whether that be a reunited with his brothers in Pittsburgh, which would be a nice story, or go home to Green Bay because he went to school in Wisconsin. If somehow by some miracle they could work out the cap situation, he comes to the Rams.
Oh boy.
Because that's been a rumored thing. I think if he can find a way somewhere to one of these teams, maybe the Bucs pick him up. You never know. I think he could get with a potential contender. I know Buffalo, Stephon Diggs reached out to him on Twitter as well and was like, wait, hear me out. So he was trying to pitch to him as well. He's going to find a great home, and the message he released on Twitter, I believe it was, the video, 2-minute video he put out, very endearing. He's given complete support to Deshaun Watson as well, and hopefully he'll find his way out of there. But you can't say enough about what a guy he is and what career he's had. And hey, hopefully in his twilight years here, he could kind of have a nice, resurgence. He'll never be what he probably is because of injury, but I think he can still be a really effective player for the right team.
No question. And I think Green Bay would be a really good spot
It'd be
for him if
nice,
that's
right?
what it turned out to be. One, I don't think you can sleep on because you can never sleep on them with these kind of things is the Dallas Cowboys,
Yeah,
just because
imagine.
they like to make the showy kind of move like that. So that would be a very Jerry Jones kind of move. But boy, if he ended up with your Rams, him and Aaron Donald and all the other talent, I mean, gosh, that would just be an
I,
unstoppable unit.
I mean, that one is the least likely to happen, so I will just say that because our cap is an absolute mess. That I don't see any way that's happening. But if somehow Les Snead could pull it off, and you tag him with Aaron Donald, and you could re-sign a Leonard Floyd and all the other guys that they have there, I mean, it would just be insanity. It would just be incredible, especially the one-on-ones that he would be getting being next to Donald. But there's no way that's going to happen. I also, if I'm him, I wouldn't go to Dallas because if you really want to win a Super Bowl, probably this is not the 90s, probably not the place to
Yeah,
go. So Green
right.
Bay, Pittsburgh, Tampa Bay, all I think are better options. Seattle, I know, has been thrown in the mix as well. Buffalo, so we'll see what happens. But Houston, a mess right now, and I pray for David Culley there and what he's going to have to deal with. Brian, let's talk about maybe some final news here for the offseason. I don't know if you've seen the reports, and I'm sure you have, with Carson Wentz in Philadelphia. It's been reported, nothing is official, that the Bears were the ones in very serious talks. Maybe Tariq Cohen, maybe some draft picks would be thrown in to Philadelphia. But I want to know your thoughts on, do you think that trade will ultimately be legitimate, that Carson Wentz could go to Chicago, which I'm not really high on that? Or
No.
where do you think Carson Wentz is going to go if you believe he's ultimately going to be traded, as I believe he will be traded?
It's really a good question. I would find it so ironic that if the landing spot turned out to be the Bears, that they go and trade for basically a bust of a quarterback who was drafted early because their own quarterback that they traded up to get to
Right?
draft number two overall, and Mitch Trubisky, was a complete flop. So with you, I just don't see that at
And
all working out.
also remember, Chicago, I would say, has even a worse offensive line than Philadelphia, probably one of the worst in the league. So if you're worried about getting hit, you're definitely getting hit in Chicago.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't see that working out at all. Now, the other thing is Philly seems to be asking for multiple first round picks. At least that was one
There's
report,
no
which there's no
way.
way they're getting.
No way in
And
the world.
exactly, and early on, we've heard that teams haven't even been willing to offer one first round pick, and I can't blame teams because what we've seen from Wentz in recent years has been too much of a fall off that you can't just say, oh, he played well a few years ago now and he's a high draft pick and sell him on all that and try to get this huge package. The reality is his value isn't that high right now. So
Yeah.
you can't go in swinging for the fences on a deal like that. I'm with you. I think ultimately he will be traded. Where is anybody's guess at this point? But Chicago, for me, just is not a good landing spot. I think
No.
Indianapolis would be one that would make more
Right?
sense now that Philip
Exactly.
Rivers has retired. They have a much better offensive line, good solid running game. That I could see him thriving a lot more. But yeah, that's another storyline to watch for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the most success by far he had in his career in 2017, where he probably would have won the MVP. He was certainly in the running before the ACL injury that he injured out in the Coliseum when he played the Rams. And then, we know the rest of that story, how that season went. But he had the most success under Frank Reich as the OC in Philadelphia. He's now obviously the head coach in Indianapolis. They needed QB. It would make the most sense. There's a pretty solid running game there, a great offensive line. There's some pieces at receiver. I like Michael Pittman. How much does T.Y. Hilton have left? Who knows? But also a really good defense. I would love him to see him do that. I know for a while they were like, oh, Wentz is done. Then they fire Peterson. Oh, he's going to stay. Then it's like, no, he says he still wants a trade, because I don't see in the locker room how that, and I said this a few shows ago, how that's working out regardless of Doug Peterson between him and Hurts. I just, there's no way that's going to not be toxic.
Right.
And so he has to be traded. I don't think they're even getting one first round pick, as you noted. I really think it's going to be a second. This is not the Goff situation, even though his contract is almost just as big. I just think when you get benched and all the struggles he's had, which has even been more than Goff, I don't see you getting a first round pick. Now, could I see the Bears and maybe Ryan Pace being a little bit idiotic and maybe giving up a first or two first round picks? Sure, I'm sure a team can make a kind of franchise killing move, but smartly, I would like to think that the second is the highest you're going to get, a second round pick.
Yeah, and I think That's true too. I think they have to be more reasonable with their asking price because if that's true, the reports that they're looking for 2 first-round
Yeah.
picks, there's just no way that's ever going to happen.
No, absolutely not. So, Brian, with that, it's a shorter show for our final show here, just because there's one game and the league news hasn't kicked off too much. The only thing I wanted to say, and I didn't know if you wanted to comment on this, but I did. Marty Schottenheimer, a longtime legend in the NFL, he passed away in this last week at 77. You know, he struggled for a long time with Alzheimer's and stuff like that and dementia. One of my favorite coaches growing up, watching just NFL films. I didn't really obviously watch him really live for the most part, not too many times, but to see him, what he did with the Chargers, what he really did with the Cleveland Browns, and watching a lot of those old NFL films as a kid, which I was really into and I still am now. Just wanted to say just something just for that legend that, you know, that he rests in peace, and you know, sad to see him go. Feel like in the last year we have so many people in the sports world or otherwise, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
unfortunately going, and yeah, just wanted to say my thoughts on that before we headed out.
Yeah, you look at baseball, all the all-time greats, Hall of Famers that we've lost over the last year. So yeah, it's affected all the sports. And you probably saw with Schottenheimer a unflattering headline written by the Washington Post
Yeah.
that said, "Coach who consistently wilted in the playoffs." I mean, come on, do better journalism.
Exactly, like that in this moment, that is not the thing at all to be bringing up. Yeah, not a great look. Do better journalism is right, especially for an organization like the Washington Post. You expect
Right,
better. You expect better.
exactly. I
Um,
was very surprised by that.
yeah, very surprised and not in great taste. So I absolutely agree. But guys, um, sorry to end on that kind of a little bit depressing note. But that is our final episode of the 2020 season here for First and 10. Brian, this was our first year doing First and 10. I had a blast. You know, I know we didn't get to it as much as we wanted to, just because, you know, we have personal lives, as I said at the top of the show, and jobs and all that. But you know what, man? I had a ton of fun, and I appreciate you coming on this journey. This is something that we talked about doing for so long. I mean, even in high school, and we actually finally did it. It was a great blast. I hope everyone out there, thank you so much for the support. I hope you guys had fun as well. We will have videos in the offseason. We will definitely be back next month when free agency actually officially opens, because I think it's going to be insane. But regular episodes will not be back until the fall, until probably September, as you would imagine. But Brian, you want to say any final thoughts here on our final episode of the season?
Well, I'm really glad we made it happen. As you said, we talked about this for a while. We talked about, I remember specifically being in high school doing a loudmouth style
Yeah,
show because that was a show that we both used to watch on SNY back when it was a little higher quality than it is
yeah,
now. And we thought, hey, you and I be able to do something like this. And so this is something that's been in the makings for years, and I'm really glad we made it happen. It's been a lot of fun. Obviously, this is what we both love to do, talk sports and specifically football here. So really enjoyed it and look forward to making it a regular thing going forward.
yeah. Absolutely, Brian. I thank you again for doing this with me and taking this journey with me. I thank Dylan for that one episode that he kind of jumped in there for Brian as well. And also, I like to thank all of you. And hopefully next season we can make little upgrades here. You know, technical wise, maybe some better cameras or better audio to improve your experience as well. That is my plan and our plan going forward. But as always, like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends if you be so kind. And until next First and 10 podcast, guys, thanks for watching.